So we'd record, over the last 5 years, we've done quite a lot of recording.
When Mick Jagger looks back at the Rolling Stones' history, there's one song that carries more frustration than triumph. A song that symbolized chaos, exhaustion, and the unraveling of patience inside the studio. That song was Rocks Off, the opening track of their 1972 album Exile on Main Street. On the surface, it sounds like the pure essence of the Stones, loud, messy, and reckless. But behind the scenes, it was nothing less than a nightmare.
The road to Rocks Off began in Exile itself. The Stones had fled England in 1971, escaping the weight of brutal tax laws and endless media scrutiny. They regrouped in the south of France, turning Keith Richards' rented Villa Nelcote, into a makeshift recording studio. It wasn't a glamorous escape. The basement was humid, the walls sweated, and cables tangled across the floor. Engineers struggled with faulty wiring, uneven acoustics, and the constant interruption of people coming and going at all hours. It was more like a den of chaos than a controlled environment for serious recording.
From the beginning, Rocks Off became the track that tested everyone's sanity. It should have been straightforward, a raw rocker to launch the album with energy. But everything about it was cursed. The basement swallowed sound unevenly, leaving Charlie Watts's drums either too distant or too overwhelming. Bill Wyman's bass drifted in and out of clarity, sometimes lost entirely in the mix. Keith Richards and Mick Taylor both laid down guitar parts, but the overlapping riffs bled together until no one could figure out who was playing what.
Mick Jagger, who was already frustrated by the disorder in France, had to force his way through multiple vocal takes. The microphone placement shifted constantly. Engineers couldn't capture his voice cleanly, and he often found himself competing with noise bleeding in from other instruments. Even his overdubs, done later in Los Angeles, were an exhausting process. Jagger admitted openly, recording Rocks Off was a nightmare. Keith Richards, living in his own storm of heroin use, was unreliable during sessions. Some nights he was sharp and explosive, tearing through guitar lines with focus. Other nights he was completely gone, barely able to stand, leaving gaps that had to be patched over later. That instability carried into the structure of Rocks Off. The Stones never played it the same way twice in rehearsal, and the official recording reflected that instability. Instruments drifted in and out of alignment, the timing slipped, the energy felt alive, but also dangerously unstable.
Producer Jimmy Miller tried to wrestle control of the track. He layered horn parts over the chaos, brought in additional overdubs, and experimented with edits to tighten the loose ends. The brass stabs were meant to give shape, but they only added another layer of density to an already crowded mix. By the time Rocks Off was complete, no one could quite explain how it had been assembled. It sounded more like a collage of takes spliced together than a single, unified recording. Jagger's frustration went beyond the technical problems. He hated that the Stones had lost the discipline they once had in Olympic studios in London. Back then, George Chiance or Glyn Johns could give them crisp, controlled recordings. Now, in a French basement, they were drowning in disorganization. Jagger felt like Rocks Off summed up everything wrong with Exile on Main Street. Unfocused, endless hours wasted, and no clear direction. To him, the process was misery. But the nightmare of recording Rocks Off became symbolic of something larger. The Stones themselves were fracturing under the weight of their excess. Jagger and Richards no longer worked as a unified team. Richards lived in his own orbit, pulling musicians into late-night jams that had no beginning or end. Jagger, who thrived on structure, grew more alienated with every wasted night. Charlie Watts sat silently at his kit, patient but increasingly drained. Bill Wyman distanced himself so much that he didn't even appear on every track of Exile. Mick Taylor tried to inject precision with his guitar playing, but his clean style was swallowed by the murk. Even when they moved sessions to Sunset Sound in Los Angeles to finish the album, Rocks Off still refused to cooperate. Jagger overdubbed vocals, adding a surreal effect in the breakdown section. Engineers tried cleaning the mix, but the track remained stubbornly messy. The tape hiss, the uneven instruments, the blurred edges, they couldn't be erased. It was what it was. Jagger reportedly walked out of sessions still muttering about how unbearable the process had been. Yet, here lies the paradox. The nightmare became part of its power. When Exile on Main Street was released in 1972, Rocks Off exploded out of the speakers as the album's opening statement. It sounded feral, uncontrollable, and raw, exactly what the Stones were in that moment. Listeners didn't hear the nightmare, they heard rebellion. The chaos that had tormented Jagger turned into the very thing fans adored. Critics, however, were divided. Some argued the mix was muddy and unpolished, calling it a step backward for the Stones. Others celebrated it as the purest example of their essence, a rejection of perfection in favor of raw danger. Over time, Rocks Off became a cult favorite, seen as one of the Stones' most essential tracks, even if Jagger still carried bad memories of the recording sessions. For Mick Jagger, Rocks Off remained a reminder of how destructive the Stones' lifestyle had become by the early 70s. What should have been a simple recording spiraled into weeks of wasted energy. The villa in France had nearly broken the band, and though the song survived, the scars of that nightmare never left him. In later years, when asked about Exile on Main Street, Jagger admitted that he didn't enjoy the process. He remembered the damp rooms, the technical failures, the drug-fueled distractions, and above all, the nightmare of recording Rocks Off. While fans cherished it, for him, it was a memory of chaos that nearly consumed the band. The irony is unavoidable. The very thing that Jagger despised became the heart of the Stones' mythology. Rocks Off wasn't clean, wasn't polished, and wasn't easy, but it was real. It captured the Stones at their most unhinged, their most unstable, and their most alive. And sometimes, nightmares create the most unforgettable music.